Hello and welcome to Dragons from Scratch, the breakdown, where we're going to talk about the session that we just watched. I'm Eric Stenmark.
I'm Christopher Campbell.
Chris Yates.
And here on the breakdown, we're going to be talking about the roleplay session that you probably just watched on the channel, hopefully, and where you had zero preparation. We're going to analyze the different aspects of the session, D&D in general, Pathfinder, other roleplay games, and how you came up with what you came up with. So why don't you talk a little bit about what the session's format was?
There pretty much was no format, at least not from a game mastering standpoint. The session and Dragons from Scratch is a real play show in which there's absolutely no preparation. The players can talk all they want. In fact, they develop their characters by themselves. And I had absolutely no connection or ability to take a look into the Discord and see what they were talking about and the things that they were sharing. And they went ahead and they created just a series of 4 really fun characters. And then I sat down having put zero thought into it. I tried to turn my mind completely off. In fact, anything that I thought of, I tried to throw it away and just get it out of my head so that I could not use that because I wanted to see just how hard it would really be to do absolutely something for me.
I mean, you know the general rules, you know the general storyline of what you're going to be trying to do, right? Like, how do you format a session without any prep? Like, how do you even begin to start?
How do you come up with a storyline? In this case, I had them roll a die 20 and I went from there. When you really don't have any clue on what you're going to do, flip a coin. That's exactly how I started. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no clue. I didn't know if I wanted to start them in a very simple, you're walking down the road, you're going to the king, or you're in trouble. So I had one of the players roll a die 20. The die 20 came up a 6, and I suddenly thought, what would be really funny? You're already arrested. So I threw him in jail.
The higher you roll, the better your situation is going to be.
Yeah, that's how I chose to do it. Okay. Yeah, for me, I'm old school. You roll a 20, it's good. You roll a 1, it's bad.
And I feel like the characters really impacted the storyline to begin with because, you guys were able to talk before the session started and you really conversed and developed your characters together instead of just doing it in isolation. Like, how much did you guys collaborate in really defining your characters? And also, because there were a lot of relationships that were there already.
Yeah.
How did you decide on those?
It's a great question. We only collaborated a little bit on arranging our origins, arranging how we knew each other, because that was some of that was, it just makes it kind of go a little bit more smoothly if we already know each other.
You guys fooled me.
We are also accomplished bullshit.
That's right.
We coordinated lightly coordinated backgrounds, and honestly, the most collaboration we did in preparation for was essentially egging each other on in the Discord. So it's I have this ridiculous idea, and someone's like, "Okay, cool, we can turn that up by this." Okay, cool. Oh wait, but what if this? Right? Just keep turning that dial until we ended up with 4 fairly ridiculous but kind of fun clips.
I mean, we had 2 accountants, and
we did
the grandma that kind of brought everyone together. It seemed because Timmy wasn't related to.
He was the neighbor's kid.
He was the neighbor's kid.
He lived in his mom's cellar.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had all those relationships kind of established already then?
You have described the extent of the planning. That is legitimately the only, it was, they're both accountants. One is a magical girl as their side hustle. One is a cryptid hunter as their side hustle.
Right.
The kid next door and mobster granny. That's all we knew going in. That is the extent of the planning.
Got it.
I feel like I got off pretty light then.
Well, we didn't want to go completely, the more we did to really set up elaborate interlocking backstories, right? Mm-hmm. That limits Campbell's freedom,
right?
To figure out how the different plot pieces interact, right? We wanted enough connection to have something to push against, right?
Right.
But we didn't want to have so much that it's Campbell would say, XYZ thing is true, and it'd be well, actually, no, in my background, that's not how that works.
Right. I mean, that kind of takes me to my next question, which is they threw you a lot of curveballs, which there were a lot of surprises in there. There were some aspects that could have either added a lot to your story or kind of shut things down as they came up.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you take things that might seem like no, I'm not going to let you do that, or I'm going to veto that, but instead of saying no, how do you turn that to a benefit to your storyline.
Right. One of the things that I always try to do when a character comes up with an idea that seems a little outlandish is you try and take it and let it accomplish the thing that they want to accomplish, but add consequences to it, right? There could be a character that comes up with all of a sudden an arrow that can change to any element. And if they needed it, they could use it to fire it at anything. The problem is that what they don't know is that when they fire it, it has an opportunity to go haywire and possibly explode in their backpack the next time they put it away. Or when you put it next to other magic items, it sucks the magic from them. So no other magic items work. So you can add elements to different items. I mean, that adds a bit of balance.
So it's like the scissors that can cut anything, right?
Yeah.
Like that's an item that could very easily become way overpowered.
That's a really good tip for when characters come up with something that possibly throws out the power balance. And in this case, in the second half of the session, there were a pair of scissors that can cut through anything. That's fantastic. But you don't exactly know what's on the other side of what you're cutting through. So, for example, if the ceiling would have been cut into in the second session and they would have gone through that, lava or acid would have poured out of the hole. Right. Something would have happened where that which is a benefit would have also created a hazard in and of itself.
Spoiler alerts for session 2, by the way. Stay tuned.
Right. I think the scissors came up in part 1 as a passing thing.
They did. And came up as a passing thing. Yeah, but their utilization was in 2.
And more of a big deal.
She kind of showed them off early on with I forget their names, but like
Twigs and Sledge.
Yeah. So she showed them off a little bit. There was a little bit of interaction, and he wound up handing over a dagger that was magical of some sort.
Correct.
But was never used. So how do you decide to introduce those kinds of items, but then also what do you do when your players never bring them up again?
You let it go. You throw in a hook, you throw in a thing, you throw in something that gives you the potential to change the game later. If it was a dagger, they really honed in on it. The story of the dagger would have grown. The story of dagger would have become a thing. Adding things that you don't use because you want there to be some potential, some thread, something to pull, something to be followed is a good tip. And they don't have to always be utilized. They can just be a loose thread. And it's okay if they're not utilized. Just put out there whatever you think could be fun and let it develop. Let it evolve.
As a player tip, also keep that stuff in your character sheet, especially when you transfer character sheets. But some of my favorite moments as a DM, when I've been a DM, is when someone busts out something that is a deep cut off of their character sheet. It's like literally a year of real time ago. They received a padlock that only unlocks with human blood, and they find some crazy use for it.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
But keep that stuff in mind, because a good callback is often just as valuable as someone who really leans into the item when they get it.
Absolutely. How does one start a session from scratch? Like, where do you go? What are your elements? What are the things that you do? And as much as I said before, it started with just a roll of the dice. I had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
But at that point, what I had to do was start throwing out as many hooks as I can, saturate the landscape and see what they pick up on, right? Like a pond with fish. Throw as much bait in on as many hooks and see what they grab. And when they grab something, grab that pole and start reeling in. Because if you just focus on a single hook, a single item, a single thread, a single path, you're not going to get the response that you want. And the response that you want is people are engaged and entertained. They're having fun. And the characters, when they explain what they are, might cause things to pop into your head. They might cause little bits to fire.
When you were developing your characters, again, like how much of it was trolling and how much of it was trying to generate hooks for Campbell to latch onto?
And I want to hear this.
I mean, I feel like it can be equal. It can be both, right? Like I feel like that's a false dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted to create characters that were fun and memorable and unusual, right? And I feel like kind of mission accomplished there. But those unusual characters also had things that could be pulled on, right? We wanted to create characters, I think, in some cases subconsciously almost, right? We wanted to create characters that we weren't murder hobos, right? We weren't characters who is like, I don't have any loved ones. I don't have any friends in the entire world. There's nothing for you to get at my character via, right? We all had relationships with each other. We all had family relationships to some extent, right? We all had things that we cared about, and those are things that the DM can pull on, and that's one of the keys, especially in a one shot, to sort of when you're creating a character,
Yeah.
right?
And
have things your DM can play off of, but also be clear about the types of stories that you want to play.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, players can't make a mistake in that regard, right? If
Right.
they think that they're going to succeed by seducing the princess, right? Well, then great. That's going to be a viable solution.
That's
Might
going to
not
be the
a
path
good
they try and
solution,
take. Yeah.
but it will work if they do the right thing, and maybe
Mhm.
sometimes with some fun consequences.
Right.
Mhm.
And when you're developing your characters, especially for like a campaign that you know is going to be going on for a long time, I feel like you might develop those characters or make choices differently than you would for specifically a one shot, right?
Right.
And
That's fair.
like, did you feel like you had more flexibility or less flexibility?
Speaking for myself here, and I feel like probably for the others as well, like I feel like one shots have much more opportunity to be like really weird, really, really creative, really fun with your characters. Like I don't know that I would have, thought of Nyx as a character that I would want to play for a long time, right?
He's going through his Gith face.
Yeah, he's going through his I still can't believe my wife stole the joke. Stepped on my
I can't believe it took him so long to get the joke.
Yes.
She had to spell it out for
She
him.
really
It
did.
did. Yeah.
She really did.
That's what happens when the mind wanders.
But so with a character that you're making for a one shot, you can be a little bit more vibrant. Like you want to be a lot more obvious about what the character is about.
Right.
There isn't time for subtlety in a lot of ways.
Moving on from the characters, with the storyline overall, you introduced something really early on that I feel like a lot of people wouldn't have gone for right away, which is the gold curse.
Yeah.
Where they could all get infected, they might have to find a cure, and who knows where it's going to go from there. And that really dictated a lot of the storyline moving forward.
Right.
So how did that specifically come around?
I needed a source of sort of like drama and conflict that had multiple outs. Right.
Mhm.
I needed something that wasn't just the evil guy in the castle, because I didn't know how to go there. So if I had like a demon or a monster that was clearly defined as this is the bad guy, he's in the Tower of Dread and he's looming over us. But something like a curse, or a sickness in this case, or a combination of the two, it immediately caused the players to start thinking in different directions. Right? Is it a curse? Is it a natural thing? Is it a magical thing? How's it being caused? Who's causing it? Is there a cure? Well, we get it. What it immediately put into the game was a sense of urgency, a sense of drama. The characters were worried. They became interested in something immediately. And that's one of the other aspects. When I started with a roll of the die, and I'm going to keep going back to the strategy,
Yeah.
and a roll of the die put them into a carriage.
Yeah.
Right. But then I had to think of a hook or something to throw them in. They're in there. They're people who they were fighting with. They didn't commit a crime, really. They were defending themselves.
Right.
But then I needed to get them out of the carriage. I had them start in a bad
It would
place.
have been a pretty mundane story.
But I had to get them out of the carriage.
We're going to take you downtown
Right.
and we're just going to have donuts and coffee for a while.
What's the quickest way to clear out a building? Scream
Yeah.
fire, right? Or something like that. So I needed a fire drill, but a fire would have been, I could have easily had kobolds attack it, somebody attack it. But in this case, I made the problem a literal plague, and I just rolled with it because it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Was there any inspiration pulled from the characters themselves? Like, you had two accountants on hand. Did that drive the gold aspect at all? Because it felt like there was a little bit of a tie in there.
Yes, the accountants are what drove me to make it money based, gold based, because they would have been interested immediately in something that was gold related. The idea of it being sort of a curse or a sickness or something that was overtaking people, that was just a lucky bit of my brain going off and connecting it to something, because having them want to take gold is one thing. Having them ravenous for gold and unable to control themselves, that's interesting. At least it was to me. So I took brigands and how do I make a bandit attack interesting? What if the bandits weren't in control of what they were doing?
Yeah.
And then it led to a curse, and it just began to grow from there as I then made up these two goofy guards. And a lot of people say, how do you make up characters so quickly? How do you make them up? I steal them. Flat out. Twigs and Sledge.
Just take 'em, yeah.
Twigs and Sledge. I stole them from Final Fantasy. Biggs and Wedge. I just
Right.
renamed them. Took a fat guard and a thin guard and I put them in the front. And why? I've played a billion zillion Final Fantasy games where I've read easily an entire the Lord of the Rings worth of dialogue from those two characters written across I don't know how many versions of that game. So that volume of it, they just popped into my head as a Beetle Bailey. I could have taken characters from Guards or some other Terry Pratchett thing. I could have taken so many different characters, but you just take from what you know, and that's okay. Take something that you know and meld it and make it your own, especially if you're doing a one shot. Go in a random direction, spiral off and make it different. Add the tie-in that immediately make people be laughable and interested and like, where are you going to go with this? And then take it somewhere. So Twigs and Sledge.
Players are going to make fun of your names anyway.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you might as well start with something silly because they're just going to
start with
misremember it anyway.
Yep.
Misremember it, change it, mock it for no apparent reason.
Yeah. Take from what you know. It's okay. It's especially for a one shot and especially when you're with friends. I mean, unless you're trying to go ahead and get it published by Wizards or something, go ahead and take from what you know, change a few letters and just use that. Sometimes these characters are only going to be around for literally one sentence anyway.
Right.
But giving them a name adds the little tiniest tab where someone can grab it and pull a whole story out of that little nugget of information. So just add a little something for people to grab onto if they want. If they don't, who cares? Move on.
And now, Chris, you've also DM'd before. How did this session feel different than possibly one of the other sessions that you've run before, that maybe you've put a lot more planning into it, maybe you've developed the storylines a lot more? How did this session kind of flow a little bit differently from a player's perspective?
I mean, I think that because of the improv nature of it, right, there are sort of story beats, right, that aren't necessarily as clear and aren't necessarily as, like, it's not a classic story with a sense. I mean, there happens to be a beginning, middle, and end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there happens to be some amount of rising action and all, everyone can go back to your creative writing courses.
I got lucky with that.
Yeah. But I mean, it was not as clearly sort of paced because it was being done on the fly, right? But it still ended up being obviously a very satisfying adventure, I think, which sort of reinforces Campbell's point here that you don't have to plan out the entire story arc. You can just sort of kind of, wing it and see how that goes.
It's okay to flounder in the beginning. When you're starting something out and your characters don't know, or they decide to go completely in a different direction, start throwing out little small things. This happens like, I'm trying to think of an example, but we're like, you got a trap and you're trying to catch the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote's throwing out stuff and the Roadrunner just walks around the trap and keeps walking around them, right, and none of the traps spring. Well, think of those as ways to get your characters on any kind of path. It doesn't always have to be the same path that railroads them back to where they want to be, but whatever they step on and whatever triggers, that trigger is what you use to develop from there. So keep putting out things and seeing what sticks. I was lucky. The gold curse stuck rather than saying, do we need to go this way? Can we go back the other way? But
there's a plague over there. We're going back.
We're going back to town. Wait, you went with the plague?
We don't want to go over there,
right? Yeah, but no. My players were great, are great, and they decided to I'm going to do the thing the DM says. That sounds like a good move. Yeah. So
yes and not no.
Yes and not no, but not all players will do that. Some players, the yes and concept is an improv idea that a player doesn't need to have, and in D&D. It'd be great if they did all have that, but if a player wants to go off in a different direction or go against the party or come up with a different idea based on their character backstory, roll with it.
I mean, I will say that, like, having played not as much as you guys, but coming from just a player's perspective, because I've never DM'd before.
We've got it's probably about 60 years between the two. When you look at it that way, we have more, right? We have an entire human lifespan of tabletop role-playing games. Okay. Human lifespan with probably a lot of bad habits, but
I mean, I started in 6th grade in 1988. So I'm ancient.
I started in 4th grade in 80, also in the 80s, but I can't remember 4th grade. I don't know how old was I.
There you go.
Iron Crown Enterprises Middle Earth Role Playing was my first. That's a very old game. Yeah. Didn't even do Dungeons and Dragons.
Advanced D&D for me, actually. It had just come out.
Gen 1.
Second edition.
Second
actually.
edition.
Yeah.
Did it just come out?
It was important to
If
state
memory
that. It was
serves,
important to
like,
state just how many years we had, just to let everybody know how old we are.
Look,
It
let us
coming
have
from an
this.
authority
Let us
standpoint.
have
yeah.
this.
This is the one thing we have going for us.
Yeah, we have that.
So
Mhm.
I come at it purely from a player's perspective. I've never DM'd before. I've never run a session. I've never read the player's handbook even. I've played, and all the games I've played have been
Pro tip.
homebrew.
Don't read the player's handbook.
We don't need,
Just don't do it.
Don't read it?
No, don't.
Why not?
I don't. Did you have fun?
It has.
Yeah, I mean, I've had fun.
There you go.
Do you enjoy reading instruction manuals? Like,
I mean, it does seem like 200 pages of just like rules.
it is.
Yeah.
Like, read the introduction. Read the, read the bit about whatever it is that you're thinking about
Mhm.
playing. Like, read like the one paragraph introductions. Read probably literally nothing else. Right.
So I mean, the whole premise of
And work with your game,
Dragons, the whole premise of Dragons from Scratch really is to make playing and GMing more approachable for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I feel like as somebody who's never DM'd before, never GM'd before, it's very intimidating because
Oh, absolutely.
there's so many rules, there's so many things to know, there's so many spells, so many things. There's so many possibilities that you get almost petrified
Mm-hmm.
trying to come up with ideas, trying to come up with storylines. And maybe the storyline's the easy part. It's everything else that's the hard part. It's the rules, it's the spells, it's the different classes, it's the different characters where you're like, I don't know if you're even allowed to do that. Let me spend 5 minutes and look it up.
Your pro tip, you are. Whatever it is, you're allowed to do it.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the big downsides to how RPGs have evolved over time. And this is not me just citing my age
Mhm.
again. But this idea that, oh, well, I don't know how to do X, right? I don't know what the rule is for X. One, your players probably might, right? Like if they are grognards like myself, right? Like they probably know what the rule is offhand. But no matter what, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Make it up. Flip
Yeah.
a coin, right? Knowing all the rules is not, I would say, not only not essential to be a good DM, sometimes it's actually an active impediment.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I feel like when I'm DMing, I feel like the rules actually are getting in my way because I know how to do a thing and it's slower to do the thing than to just do what would be correct, right? Which is just, do it on the fly. One of the things that I think it's a very common mistake,
Mhm.
right? Is this idea of DMs and players are antagonizing each other.
Yeah.
Right. It is a shared journey. It is a shared story. The players are driving the car. The DM is the road crew.
Mhm.
Right. They're taking obstacles away and they're putting obstacles up.
Yeah.
Making it an interesting drive. And this idea that, oh, well, I'm going to trivialize this encounter by using some sort of player knowledge, right? Like that's
Mhm.
probably not an interesting story.
No.
And recognizing having that shared goal, having that shared intent to tell an interesting story, I think is super important.
Opening a door with player knowledge can be really
Yes.
fun. It
Yes,
can be
well
really
said.
fun, like just like you said, you can use it to open up a completely new avenue.
Yep. Yes.
Taking a
like
look
we did. Yeah.
like you did. Yeah. No, I mean, getting into that, there's a lot more of that happened in the second half,
Yeah.
but this comes back to the first half because that's what we're still talking about and the thing that I really wanted to focus on is sort of the tips and tricks is you can have a random roll that I start you out. You can have random things. Let you as a game master make a choice,
Mhm.
right? If you want it to be, something that's negative, something that's positive, or something that's neutral, pull a card, random dice, paper, rock, scissors, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Setting a world and making a setting that is generic, simple, like Everdale is not a real city. I just made it up.
Yeah.
I made up Everdale.
Wait,
I made
Everdale's not real?
What?
Everdale's completely not real.
Wait,
No, I just
next thing
created
you
it.
tell me Eberron's not real.
Eberron is 100%.
It's all made up?
I thought that was in like Sweden or something.
This is a documentary.
This is the gift thing I didn't get. It's the same thing. Again, it's just me just actually thinking we're having a conversation. Y'all just poking shit at me. No, but but coming up with that, if I would have put it in any city,
Yeah.
I knew certain players at that table had vast knowledge of the setting I put it in. And I wanted to put it in a place that was just open and generic enough,
Yeah.
right? It's okay to pick a city or a place that's well known.
Mhm.
Have fun. You love playing Baldur's Gate as a video game. Great. Put your one shot in Baldur's Gate. Be prepared that people might know a lot about Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
prepared.
Everyone knows New York City.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Put it in New York City.
Right.
I haven't played Baldur's Gate yet.
Yes.
And I need to, obviously, because apparently it's amazing.
Yeah.
But from what I gathered, the rules aren't the same in Baldur's Gate as they are in D&D. Because
They're like
obviously they
90% the same.
couldn't be,
They're
right?
close.
I mean, they couldn't be
They're fair.
100%. But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if you played Baldur's Gate, I feel like you could basically take all those rules and run a session around that,
Yep.
right? You could basically just take what you've learned from Baldur's Gate and run a D&D session.
It's going to be
Just
interesting to see how that
know that it's
plays
not
out.
100%.
Yeah.
But
It's pretty close.
I mean, you could run a campaign based on Baldur's Gate.
Pure, absolutely. Well,
yeah. Yeah, that's what we just talked about.
Oh, never mind.
He was out of it.
I was out of the room.
Yes, I know.
Awkward.
But it's true. It's like you really could. And but it's not just Baldur's Gate. But Baldur's Gate is really a great example because here's a video game and here's a story. Elements from that story can develop. They can be taken. They can be utilized to create your own story. And it's okay to borrow.
Mhm.
It's okay to borrow. Borrow from Mass Effect. Borrow from Lord of the Rings. Borrow from Judge Dredd. Borrow from any comic book. Take these elements and use what has entertained people and meld them together in fun and interesting ways. Lego bricks, okay, are a good analogy for building a story very quickly. Grab what's there, build the shape, and then go. It's going to have some wonky angles. The colors might not all match, but in the end, it's going to click and fit together.
It's that old trope of write what you know.
Yeah.
Right.
And take the stories you know, take the characters you know, and build off of that.
Mhm.
And I mean, you're not going to write a story about something you've never experienced and can't even perceive, because how could you?
Yeah.
But you can take what you've played in different games, take what you've read out of the various different books you've read, videos that you've watched online, and just build a story around that.
It's all fair game.
I hear the fear a lot from game masters of, I'm afraid it's going to be derivative. I'm afraid it's going to be derivative. Yeah, don't. Don't.
Just don't.
Don't be afraid it's a derivative.
You have big old ambulatory random number generators in your game that the book doesn't have.
Yeah.
You got players. They're not gonna, they're gonna do weird shit.
Players give you the fuel you need. They always do. At least players that are engaged. If your story is interesting, if you catch them really early on, I did it with a wagon full of people exploding into gold and then a curse. And then the curse seemed to be the kindling and the spark needed to ignite a fire. That was interest. Once they were interested, they went with it.
How do you take those early scenarios and then build off of it to like, oh, there's PvE, there's all these things, and there's all these helpers, and where does that drive your storyline?
It was a question that was asked, which then led me to embellish. A question will embellish, because I like to tell players, I will tell you some things, but the more you ask, the more information you will get. Otherwise, I would be sitting there and I would be describing that hospital for 35 minutes. I'd be describing this thing. So I give
There's 12 hallways, 47 rooms.
Each door is exactly 8 meters tall, which is extremely large. But then you did realize that you saw some huge formatted friendly ogres walking around town.
Why would they have large doors?
Why would we do that? Right. So things that I needed to throw in that could have just embellished, but I needed to embellish enough to give interest and to give hooks.
Yeah.
What do you want to follow? Here again, here's a scene. Here's 5 things to follow.
Giving players things to do.
So one thing I actually want to go back to for just a second, I want to make something implicit, explicit, right? Which is when Granny is taking the small bit of gold curse, whatever
skin,
right? Putting a thing. So there's something implicit there, which is 1, this is a threat. 2, this is how you deal with the threat. That's actually super important, right? Because the player has established, this is the thing I'm paying attention to. This is the thing I'm concerned about. This is the thing that you, the DM, can pull on later, right? And of course, obviously you did, right? Because this is not your first rodeo, as they say. But it's that idea that the player, essentially first one's free, right? The player has established, oh, shoot, this is a threat. If she just walked up and just grabbed it, right? Maybe it would have been fine. Maybe that's not a thing that the players are expressing interest in through their actions, that this is a thing to explore further.
Or they could have gone, oh, well, that's weird, and then turned 90 degrees and just walked off into the sunset.
Yeah. That's exactly correct. The action, the action reaction. I hadn't thought to make it contagious by touch. I hadn't thought of how to make it contagious at all. But when a player decides to do a thing and you don't look, you look at them, and instead of saying you didn't need to do that, you go, great, good idea. You've validated that player is now engaged. They are engaged because you just said, this thing that you were doing is good. It's good also for me because you just gave me the idea, but also it's good because now doing that, now we know we've established a stake here. This stuff spreads by touch. Bam. Good. Go. Move it along.
then that takes us into the first combat,
Yep.
which is in the
Oh, yeah,
alleyway.
Mhm.
And
The other way you can get this.
I mean,
apparently.
yeah, the other way you can get it. And I mean, you're in combat. There's a chance you probably are going to get touched,
Mhm.
or you might have to touch someone. I mean,
We get
it's a
some
good
blood
thing.
on you.
It's a good thing you didn't have a monk. Let me say.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
indeed. I mean, that was an interesting thing because I tried so hard and I failed every time. Perfect, great dodges. Couldn't roll a grapple to save my soul. Had to hit with weapons, foaming mouth. Everything that happened, it failed.
So
There's nothing I did.
you were actively trying to get them infected.
I wanted to add that as an element, but I didn't want to force it. If they literally got out of it by good rolls and my bad rolls, I wanted to let that play out completely as it did.
Yeah.
I didn't flub a single roll. I just let it go. Yes, you can flub a roll as a game master. Go ahead, especially if it's going to be fun. If you're going to wind up wiping the entire party because they had a bad roll and your dragon rolls like all 8s on their breath weapon, yeah, that sucks. Just don't do that. But I mean, if you want to play that way, great. I personally don't. But with that fight, it was a pacing thing.
Mm-hmm.
We'd gone hours without any kind of a combat, and I like to add a little bit more variation in a one shot because I've only got you for 4, maybe 5 hours. I want you to have an experience that allows you to use a good amount of your skills in different scenarios, and throwing in a quick alley fight broke things up. It broke up a pace. We went from talky, roly, talky to swords and death, and then another puzzle. Do you save an innocent? How do you save an innocent?
Right.
And that was just all of the things we'd done before, culminating to a random encounter.
You had somebody notice down the alleyway. Hey, something's
noticed.
going on.
So I just created a thing.
High perception scores are a blessing and a curse.
Indeed.
And I think that does take us to the break for after this episode, and going into the next episode, the next part of the session, the second half. They just finished out that battle. They rescued the kid.
Oh yeah.
Ingrid took him off to the church and came back.
Yep.
And
also random, by the way.
Also random.
Yep.
The reason why the not the kid, but the reason the halfling didn't do it was to cover up a mistake.
Huh. What do you mean?
Watch that area of the show. You'll see that I skipped the halfling's attack and I moved right onto the top of the initiative order after the human exploded, but I didn't do anything to the halfling. The halfling got sprayed and then moved on.
Yeah.
The halfling didn't attack. So I immediately wanted to cover up the fact that the halfling didn't attack.
Why wouldn't they have attacked?
Timmy got sprayed too.
He did.
And
But I rolled
really
save,
good.
He rolled really well.
They rolled on the save, made their saves.
I was 100% expecting to get.
Maybe you'll be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a chance.
There's still a chance. There's still a chance.
Maybe in the second half. We haven't found out yet.
Yeah, that's another kind of interesting point. Is it's okay to make mistakes, mess things up, and go ahead and add something. But rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to go back to the halfling. The halfling did get a chance to swing.
Right.
The halfling swings. I went and I made it that when one of them would die, the other one would be shocked because the other one still had a bit of their head left. They weren't completely gone and they were savable. I just thought of that, just threw that in. I said, the halfling doesn't attack you. What? And you saw everybody immediately stopped and pulled back and went, okay. They went around, they saved the kid, they figured something out, and that happened. But that happened because I screwed up and I had just a spur of the moment change that I just changed things up. But it also sells, it's back to the point is all of that was still coming from just working off what we'd worked off of before, right? The way that we had come up to that point, creating the church, providing a way for the people to be healed by taking them back, everything. What we'd done before was the thing that gave me the inspiration to say, maybe this guy can get back to the church in time to not die. Yeah. And I just thought of that because I'd already run a whole bunch of people who were being saved. And I showed somebody being saved with a spell.
Right.
So you knew that the dwarf back in there had the ability to do it. Mm-hmm. Once you start with the very simple premise of start with what you know, as your story progresses, callbacks will inform the future. You don't have to think of all of it off the top of your head. Call back to what you've done. That starting off point is the hardest point. Is where do you start off? Come up with something wacky. Come up with something funny. Come up with something interesting. Come up with something that immediately gets them thinking. Like you're on a tightrope over a pit of very hungry displacer beasts. And all around you are people throwing down money on whether or not you're going to fall. Really? Yep. Yeah. You're on a board. You're perfectly balanced so that half you're on one side, half you're on the other. How did we get here? I don't know.
You don't remember.
You don't remember.
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
If the player doesn't know how they got there, if they don't have something in mind, that's interesting. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Let's pull on that.
I like Memento.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
You don't remember your own name. How strange.
Nope, you don't. You don't. Yep.
I've had a campaign open with that.
Yeah.
Fun. Well, I mean,
you can't do it every time.
You get one.
You get one. You get one. But if you think back and you talk about it,
it was all a dream.
It was all a dream.
Yeah.
You killed you.
I mean, I guess we'll find out where the party goes in the next session.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Then it's the second half of the session, I guess.
Yep.
And you've introduced the gold curse. They've gone to the church to try and figure out what's going on. They've gotten the PPE.
Yep.
And
We think we know. We
Twigs and Sledge gave them a direction to go. They know
got
where
a direction to go in. You've heard about this circus that might be off
Circus
in the
and
field
casino
somewhere.
might be a
Yep.
casino also.
Mhm.
So I guess we'll pick that up in the second half of this first session.
All
So stay tuned and look out for the next episode.